Good evening. Good evening and welcome. Good evening to everyone who's here with us in person and online at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study and the Jerry H. Labowitz Theater for the Performing Arts. We are delighted you're here. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Gallatin School and to this event, Gallatin Celebrates 50, Earth Day 22. This symposium in honor of Earth Day today and Gallatin's 50th anniversary of its founding all year, but mostly celebrating next week. My name is Louise Hartman. I'm a professor of architecture, urban design, and sustainability here at Gallatin. I'll be moderating the proceedings this evening while also participating in the final presentation. Tonight we have three parts to our program. I'll give a brief introduction to each speaker before their presentations, and then we'll join together for questions and answers at the end. We have a way for you to send us questions in the online world that we'll be moderating and watching throughout. So please be thinking of questions if you have them. Before we begin, I'm going to paraphrase one of my favorite sources for reliable, independent, hard-hitting environmental journalism, The Guardian. The Guardian says, "Happy Earth Day from a not-so-happy Earth." The faculty members who are part of tonight's presentation, faculty working with students and staff, were part of a small sample of the Gallatin professors, alumni, and students whose scholarly work, teaching, and activism focuses on or intersects with the environment and the climate crisis. We invite you to join our work or to connect with initiatives whose work you can amplify. There's a lot of work to be done. As we begin, first let me introduce Gallatin faculty member Carly Krakow, a scholar of international law and environmental justice. Also, I'm using the lav, I thought. Okay, I'm using both. Hello, good evening. I'll start over. Gallatin faculty member Carly Krakow will be our first speaker tonight. She's a scholar of international law and environmental justice, also a writer, a journalist, an activist, and a professor. Professor Krakow's work has taken her to the Palestinian West Bank, where she investigated water access and exposure to toxins. In South Africa, she analyzed the impacts of Cape Town's water crisis on the city's most marginalized communities. In Greece, she examined living conditions and access to health care for asylum seekers and refugees. Tonight, Professor Krakow will bring us into her work focusing on forms of resistance that intersect with environmental justice and toxic exposures. She'll then introduce three of her current students taking her course, Environmental Racism and Environmental Justice, and we'll hear about some of the work they're doing. Please join me in welcoming Professor Carly Krakow, also a Gallatin alum.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Louise, and thank you, everybody, for being here on this beautiful sunny Earth Day and taking time to be in here with us for this event. I'm just going to take a second and pull up my presentation, and then we will get started. All right. So let's see. There we go. Okay, thank you. So I'm so thrilled to be here with you to celebrate Earth Day and reflect on how we can use this occasion not only as a celebration, but as a challenge to examine how we can better support struggles for environmental justice and efforts to combat environmental racism and all connected forms of injustice here in New York City, in the US, and internationally. As Louise shared with you, I am a Gallatin faculty member. I'm also a very proud Gallatin alum, having completed my BA at the school. So it's been incredible to be back as an instructor, and I'm especially delighted that you are going to get to hear from some of my current students, who I'll introduce to you in a few minutes and then turn it over to them. I'll also be telling you about some of the students in the course doing great projects who are here tonight as well. First of all, just thank you again, Louise, for hosting this evening. I also want to thank the incredible team who made the event possible. Rachel, Jen, Casey, Andy, Teresa, and many others. I'm smiling at you under the mask to thank you. I'm also so excited to see Open Earth Studios' brand new film, and to hear from Andrew Levitas about Minamata. My students learned earlier this semester about the devastating mercury poisoning that caused such harm in Minamata, so I know they're looking forward to hearing those remarks. And of course, it goes without saying that I am so grateful to our dean, Suzanne Wolford. She's truly a visionary. She is responsible for so many incredible events and projects, and she puts people together, including faculty and students who would otherwise not ever meet and who end up fostering such valuable connections and collaborating creatively. So thank you, Suzanne. I know she is watching through the stream link for your support and your devotion to making Gallatin an incredible place to teach and to learn. So I'm here tonight mainly to tell you a bit about a course I am teaching this semester called Environmental Racism and Environmental Injustice, Rights, Citizenship, and Activism. So in true Gallatin spirit, the title alone packs a lot of information, and each of the students will be reflecting on different aspects of this set of topics. The image on the screen that you see in the background is from Alexander Glustrom's documentary, Mossville, When Great Trees Fall. This is a place called Cancer Alley. The community Mossville is located there in the US South, and you will hear a bit more about that, a little from me, but mostly from one of our students. Before we get into all that, I just thought I'd share a very brief anecdote. I was at an event last week, and I told someone that I was meeting for the first time that I'm going to be part of an Earth Day event. I'm speaking with my students, really looking forward to it. I'm so excited, and joking, but not joking, this person asked, oh, is it going to be one of those Earth Day events? And I knew immediately what they meant, which was essentially, is this going to be a mainstream environmental greenwashing event at which you're going to maybe, shout at people about reducing their individual carbon footprint and not attend to issues of structural, systemic racism or other issues regarding how environmental injustice intersects with race, class, gender, disability, citizenship, immigration status, and more. And so I was proud to say, no, this is an event at NYU Gallatin, and I wish my students had actually been there because they can speak so eloquently, as you will see, about exactly why this cannot be, especially in our current political moment, that kind of event. So why they wouldn't really allow it to ever be that kind of event. So the saying is that when you teach, you actually learn a lot more than you impart on your students. I think everyone has experienced that that really is true here at Gallatin, and it's been true for me learning from them this semester. So I'm excited tonight that you all get to hear from them. We have Allison, Trish, Kadi, we also have Malachi, Charlie, Sanem, and I'll say a little bit more about them later. So to get an overview, in the course we've been addressing core questions such as how are environmental racism and environmental injustice related to belonging in and exclusion from local, national, and international communities? How do questions about citizenship, rights, and rightlessness relate to environmental racism and injustice? We've been redefining some key terms. You can see some words chosen by the students on the screen. We've looked at situations across the country and the world, lead poisoning in Flint, Michigan, and then again, Cancer Alley in the US South. You can see another photo from there on the screen. Standing Rock, Vieques, Puerto Rico, war toxins in Iraq, Vietnam, and Japan, and some examples from my own fieldwork, as Louise mentioned, environmental injustice in Palestine, and the Day Zero water crisis in Cape Town, South Africa, some images from Cape Town townships up on the screen there, and many, many other cases. The students have also each been presenting on a case of their choosing that is not already covered on the syllabus. So for example, Sanam brought in the Beirut trash crisis to our course. Allison, who you'll hear from later, is going to talk to you about climate migration in Central America, a topic she's bringing into the course, drawing on her knowledge and research. And a guiding focus has been to think about forms of resistance to environmental injustice, toxic exposure, and the climate crisis, including the roles of activism, law, fiction, music, poetry, and journalism. So the music that you heard a little bit of earlier at the beginning of tonight's event is from an environmental justice playlist curated throughout the semester, a mix of some of my favorites and new selections from students in the course, so some great stuff that they added that I hadn't heard before, and we'll have a link to that later as well. A question that's interested us this semester is how we actually define activism and resistance. So of course, some of the time it is crucial things like marches, protests, and petitions, things that you might conjure up in your imagination when we hear the word activism. But often it takes other forms for those most violently impacted by environmental injustice, and we've been thinking a lot about that. So for example, Kadi is going to tell you a bit more about Mossville and Cancer Alley. And for one member of that community, Stacy Ryan, who she'll talk to you about, resistance takes the form of refusing to leave his home even when he's being violently pushed out to make way for the expansion of the chemical and energy industries. Or perhaps resistance is not a protest as we might imagine it here in New York City at all, but it is families in Iraq dealing with their children suffering from birth defects and shocking rates of cancer following exposure to burn pits and depleted uranium, something I call toxic saturation in my work. We also looked at several works of poetry and fiction to understand the roles of creative expression and art for resistance. We read works by Jesmyn Ward, whose novel Salvage the Bones is based on her experience of surviving Hurricane Katrina, work by Gallatin professor, novelist and poet Sinan Antoon, indigenous poet Joy Harjo, the novelist Yoko Tawada, Amitav Ghosh's work about how fiction addresses or at times fails to address the climate crisis. Just to share a bit more background with you, my writing and research closely relates to the course. I write, as Louise mentioned, journalism and fiction on environmental justice topics, but in my academic work, I draw on the political theorist Hannah Arendt, who wrote about totalitarianism. And I try to unravel our assumptions about rights and citizenship and argue that environmental injustice is so widespread and its impacts are so devastating that it can actually be understood as a totalitarianism of our time. So I focus on how environmental injustice robs communities of what Arendt called the right to have rights, including those who are legally stateless, as well as those who become de facto stateless, meaning the injustice they experience is so severe that they are denied rights despite their legally protected status. So here I'm thinking of indigenous communities in places like Cancer Alley that I mentioned, where the legacies of slavery persist to this day through toxic terror. Trish is going to tell you tonight about her project on toxic terror and about how art and activism can be used to combat it. Before I wrap up and hand it over to them, just some final things to share with you. We do have a course blog on Medium where all the students have been writing reflections on their work, so check it out because each student is really doing wonderful things and I'd love for you to hear from all of them. We'll be fleshing it out more in the next couple of weeks with Earth Day reflections as well and some final reflections for the course. The link is on the screen and in the chat, I believe. The site also has a link to that YouTube playlist from earlier. I also want to share some incredible artwork by another one of our talented Gallatin students from the course who is here tonight, Charlie Besso. Charlie, as you can see, is an amazing artist, and he has a series that he did on his own before the course began, I should say that, where, as you can see, he presents a visual interpretation of how we are harming ourselves through our destruction of the planet. Here is another piece of his. And he's actually working on a new piece as his final project now for the course. So Charlie's info is up on the screen as well, so you can take the time to properly check out more of his work in detail and ask him about it. Also, in the Q&A discussion section, we are going to hear from Malachi Parsons, who's also here. All my students are kind of grouped over here if you want to say hi. Malachi is a Tisch student and filmmaker who is working on a film now about a community on Sandy Island, South Carolina, who are descended from enslaved Africans and who are being pushed off their land in the name of environmental preservation. So Malachi can tell you about this best himself. But I think his subject is one perfect encapsulation of a tension we've covered in this course between environmental justice, which seeks to combat environmental racism and its intrinsic connections to slavery, colonialism, and imperialism on the one hand, and forms of mainstream environmentalism on the other, which often prioritize the environment without sufficient attention to the communities that inhabit it, the people that have been made unjustly vulnerable, and these same people who resist this injustice in various ways. And just some photos there on his topic that you can check out along with the contact info. So I will stop here and I will turn it over to Allison Argueta Claros first, then Kadiatu Ba second, and Trish Sachdev third, all amazing Gallatin students. I'm so excited to hear from them, and as I said, we'll be seeing and hearing from other students later in the event as well. And I can't wait for the discussion and to hear from the other faculty speakers. Thank you so much, and see you again in a bit.